Welcome to the Crap and the Crazy with Tash Critter. Tash owns Little Wooden Toy Box and is mother of 2 teens, both with autism, ADHD and PDA. 10 years in early intervention, working with the kids' OTs, speechies and psychologists has given Tash unique insight into understanding difficult behaviours and why they occur, as well as understanding how emotional regulation and sensory input impacts us and our behaviour. This insight has helped Tash design and implement resources and coping strategies to make home life calmer and more organised. Join Tash as she talks about day-to-day life with autism, the sucky bits and the wins, plus tips for enjoying life despite the challenges.
Hello.
Hi.
I'm here with Ish. Ish is our speech therapist. She is a speech therapist from Speech Therapy Services in Canning Vale. And she mentors Speechies with the Speechie Life.
That's right.
Got it right that time. Yay! Today we wanted to talk about sensory profiles, sensory regulation and emotional regulation, what that looks like, and also letting you know, because you know, as a parent, you think that speechies and OTs and your therapy team is supposed to understand these things, particularly when we've got kids with autism or sensory processing disorder, and, you know, sensory plays such a massive role. But us as parents and even as teachers, because my background's in teaching, we don't know what this is. And in the last episode, Ish was saying, you know, us as adults, we do things like have our coffee and, you know, clothing preferences, and we do different things throughout the day to keep us well regulated. But I didn't realize that any of these things were actually, I don't know, I thought they were just things you did. I didn't realize the effect they had, how I use them strategically throughout the day, or maybe I didn't, but I could have and I do now. And, you know, your speeches and your OTs are supposed to know this, but they don't.
We don't.
No. Why don't you?
Well, firstly, sensory processing and sensory regulation falls under the domain of occupational therapists. So that's the first thing. So as speech pathologists, we are now veering into this lane and we are learning more and more about it, but it predominantly sits under the OT umbrella. So what I find as a therapist, especially when you're working with kids that have varying needs, so we're talking neurodiversity and there's going to be sensory issues, executive functioning issues that we need to deal with and accommodate for. We've got language in there as well, and communication and social, and there's just a whole bunch of things going on that as a therapist sometimes we need to kind of learn about skills that don't necessarily sit under our degree of communication, because that's what speech pathologists deal with, is communication, whether that's talking or whether that's using sign or whether it's using a communication device or written communication. We are in communication, but I've worked with lots of OTs in the past, and so seeing that level of sensory and how you can add that into your therapy sessions and how you could look at that sensory regulation is really important. But even for me to learn about that, I've had to do a course in that.
Yeah, what course did you, because I've never asked you this before, and even just going back a little bit, as far as OTs, like not all OTs are sensory trained, and there's a section, a collection, or whatever of OTs that don't actually believe or think there's any merit to the sensory. And I'm like, but how do you work with these kids without addressing the sensory and the emotional regulation? And yeah, I don't know. Sorry, I asked a million questions all in once. Go back to, how were you trained? I've never asked you
how I was trained. Yeah, sure. So what I found was in my early jobs, so especially when I was working at the Telethon Speech and Hearing Centre, I worked with occupational therapists who were amazing. They were really knowledgeable, and they just, we had the gym there, and you could just see when children were on the swings, the flying foxes, the tramps, what a difference it made to their regulation, how calm they were able to be, how it decreased their anxiety and their overwhelm, and then from there they were able to go and do tasks that they would have found really challenging beforehand. So having worked with really good OTs, what I found when I moved into private practice was that it was much harder, especially in the last, I would say 5 to 6 years, finding OTs that really understood sensory. And from my understanding, and I'm really happy to be corrected if this is incorrect, is that I'm hearing that a lot of OTs don't get the sensory training in their undergraduate degrees. So they're coming, OTs are coming out of university without this information. So what I was finding really frustrating is that I'd be on the phone to OTs that were part of the child's therapy team, and I wasn't getting the activities and the information and the tools that I needed to be able to support the child in our therapy sessions. And so because I'm just one of those do it type of people, and Tash knows this about me, I was just like, I've got to learn about this, because if I've got OTs that I'm working with and they're not able to help me with it, and I am working with the child and I'm working with the family, I need to know about this so that I can support the child much more. So I learnt about zones of regulation first, and then I also did a sensory processing course run by a speech pathologist in the United States, and she works predominantly with neurodiverse kids, and so I did the 6-month course that really helped me understand sensory regulation and how to apply the right strategies and tools if the child was really up and we needed to kind of bring them gently back, or whether they were really low and we needed to kind of hype them up so that they were able to sit and attend and focus and complete tasks.
Yeah, that was a really big one. Between my 2 kids with autism, you often see, the emotional regulation, sensory regulation used to bring kids back down so they can focus. But my girl, and through years of work with my 2 kids, and then getting to the point, and I remember working on this with you, we needed to get my girl going, and I didn't even know this was a thing.
Get them hyped up.
She's like a sloth. Get up, like from getting up to getting ready in the morning, it just takes so long. And I didn't realise that too was something that you needed to put things in place, to get them going. So that was your crunchy foods and your cold things, and that which we do in our emotional regulation training. But sorry, I interrupted you there.
That's all right. So I think it's really important. You're going to find more and more speechies are venturing into this area. They're learning more about sensory processing. You've got OTs out there that know so much about it, and other OTs that are learning about it. Being able to find an OT that could do a sensory profile on your child is super helpful, because then you know what are the things that your child is seeking and what are the things that they're avoiding, and therefore you can give them those things at the appropriate times, whether you need to hype them up a little bit to get them started and to get their engine going, or you need to bring them back down again, especially at nighttime. Because if you've got a child who is really up at night and is just on the go and is just getting overstimulated, it's going to be really hard to have them go to sleep, even with all the melatonin in the world. So
I know. We're doing that at the moment.
Bringing them down is really important, and to be able to work with therapists who can give you lots of tools that you can use to trial at home, and it's just a lot of trial and error.
It is. There's no, and what works for one kid isn't going to work for the next one, and what worked yesterday may not work today, and tackling it from a trial and error point of view, but having, your kid, even when they get a diagnosis, you don't get a manual for all of these things. So, what I've learned over the years has been collected from all the different therapists, I suppose, and
trial and error.
It is. It's trial and error, and what works for you. And then you've got the issues of things that work for your kids. And I remember you telling me you just got to get over that, as far as your kids smacking their food on the couch at nighttime, and I just want to rip their heads off. But you're dealing with so much, and they're making progress in so many areas that you just have to let it go. But understanding,
it's hard, right? It's really hard to
understanding
let it go.
As a parent, letting it go, and also understanding your sensory profile as well, important. And you can then begin to understand where you set each other off and what you can work with and what you can manipulate and where you need to compromise. And so
that's called co-regulation. So what I always encourage parents
deep
to
breath.
do.
Your head just disappeared off screen.
Thankfully, it's still on my shoulders. So I think as humans, what we've got to do first is understand our regulation and what makes us tick. So what are the things that, and when we talk about sensory, what we're talking about is things that you can see, things that you can smell, things that you can taste, things that you can hear, things that you can touch, and then kind of what's going on inside your body as well. And so just becoming aware of that is the first step. So, and noticing what are the noises that really irritate you. For me, it's
my
motorbikes.
child eating
Dash, it's
or brushing teeth. Yeah, anyway.
So working out what irritates you and then what do you actually really enjoy, and being able to understand how when you are feeling stressed and overwhelmed, how your child eating and the sound of their eating will tip you over and completely dysregulate you, or that you can put some nice things into your day that bring back your regulation and just help you feel just calm and okay in your body. And then I love how you talk about where you don't feel okay in your own skin.
We don't fit in our skin, and I've used that term because I have not come up with another term that works for me, and I use it for my kids too. So now when they're feeling like that, I don't fit in my skin. It doesn't mean I can fix it, but I think just understanding
understanding it, and also just kind of thinking about it in terms of what are the things that you need in your day to be able to fit into your skin. Right? I think that's going to be really important. Understanding that so that you can go, okay, these are the things that are my non-negotiables. So I think as parents, if we can't be okay in our skin, right, and as the adults around the child's life, if we can't be okay in our skin and we are feeling really dysregulated, that we are going to bring that into our interactions with all the other humans in our life, including our kids, right? So the more regulated you can be, the easier it's going to be to deal with your child's dysregulation and to be able to tackle their dysregulation and to accommodate for their dysregulation and put those tools and strategies in place because you're regulated.
And I think like this process as well is not something that you, okay, now I know this, now I'm going to get it right. This takes years and years, and you've constantly got that adjustment of this is working for me, but then my kid's setting me off, and you know, just that.
And bodies change.
Right? They do. Needs change. And then also, you know, when you know your kid's going to go through a hard time or is going through a hard time, then having things ready for when, so my girl's just gone on camp, and that's a huge adjustment and, you know, change in what she would normally do. So knowing full well, based on year 6 camp where she came back and didn't talk for 2 weeks, having things in place ready just in case. And not to say that it's going to, like, the strategies I've got are going to work, but at least I've kind of set that expectation and am kind of prepared for it to be really crap for a little while, and, you know, a bit more lenient, I suppose, too. And in me changing my expectations there, whenever she comes back in a bad mood or whatever else, I'm not then ready to just bite her head off. Does that make sense?
It does.
Yeah.
And I think that's the thing. It's about expectations, right? So again, we can manage our expectations and disappointment around our expectations not being met when we are regulated ourselves, right? If we are feeling overwhelmed, if we're feeling stressed, if we're feeling anxious, if we're spiraling, if the tags on our clothes are bothering us that day, if we haven't had our coffee, if we are really counting down the hours until we can get that glass of wine in, then expectations that aren't met are going to be deeply disappointing and are going to tip us over. And because we're only human, and I think we've got to keep that in mind always. We're only human, and you're going to have good days and you're going to have okay days and you're going to have bad days, and that's just the human experience. And then you add neurodiversity into the mix, and you add a household into the mix where everyone's got varying needs, and it's a lot to juggle. So there's lots of chances of things not going perfectly all the time.
Yeah, all the time. Do you remember, that just reminded me of, so during all the shutdowns and whatnot, I used to go for walks with my kids, and then they kind of grew up into that high school stage, and we're getting towards the end of that. And I'd worked my ass off for 3 days. I can't remember what I was working on, but it was all with the intention of, you know, from lunchtime on, say, Wednesday, we were going out to Bells Rapids. Do you remember this?
Yes, I do.
And my kids, so I'd set the timer, I'd set everything, I'd set all the expectations, all the routines, everything was in place. And I had worked right up until this time, and they were supposed to get ready and whatever, and they just didn't get ready. They just didn't. I bawled my eyes out for like 3 hours. Like, I lost the plot entirely. And this is very, don't cry. This is very unusual, but just that frustration of, I had worked for 3 days so I could have this afternoon off, and I love being outside with the trees and the whatever else, and they ruined it. And I locked my door and cried for ages, and I did not want to be anywhere near my children. They really upset me. And they're like, what's your problem? And because they didn't understand the drive there, and you had to be out by 4 o'clock because of the council rules and whatever.
Taking. Sometimes it's just purely perspective taking, being able to think about, okay, as you were saying, Tash, like you worked really hard to be able to have that time off, but your kids aren't going to see that.
No.
Right?
No.
And
no.
That's the thing.
No.
Yes. And then we came up with some strategies of how to get you out of the house if that situation happened again.
I'm pretty sure I put a lock on my door from around that.
Yeah, I think you did.
Well.
Yeah. Personal space
boundaries
is so important.
Yep.
And I think as a parent, that's a really big one. If you find that you get dysregulated or you don't feel comfortable in your skin when you don't have enough personal time and personal space, that would be one of the number one strategies I would say that you need to be thinking about. How can I get that personal time? How can I get that personal space? Is it something like putting a lock on your door? Is it getting somebody just to watch your kids for 30 minutes so that you can just walk out of the house and go for a walk or get a coffee or sit in your car or whatever it is? Is it that you when you've got kids at school, you drop off your kids, and rather than just getting in the car and going and doing the next thing that you need to do, you sit in your car for like 15 minutes.
I sit in my car lots.
And read, or get to the school like 15 minutes early and read or scroll or whatever it is, watch something on your phone, like whatever it is, you need to be creating times in your day where you're getting that personal time, because I think that's a big one that you lose as a parent. And I think mums in particular, because from when you've got your baby, like you're on 24/7, and at some point you can't, as a human being, be on 24/7 for 20 something years, right?
Yeah, true.
You're going to need a break.
Yeah, that's when we lock ourselves in a room and cry for 3 hours.
Right.
Yeah.
Whatever gets it out.
Yeah. Well, yeah. And look, that's another thing as well, just processing and being okay with not being okay.
Yeah.
That's been another one.
That's exactly it. And I think also just being mindful, like the more you can be mindful about your sensory needs, the easier it's going to be for you to be aware of your child's sensory needs.
Yes.
So even in us doing our podcast today.
Yeah, we've got some boundaries in this space.
So if you're on YouTube and you're watching the video, you'll be able to see it. But one of the stipulations Tash had was that we had to both fit on screen, but we couldn't be touching each other or too close to each other, and the aircon had to be turned on.
Yeah. I've said this before, the aircon's like at full ball, and I normally put on a jumper and trackies. I've got the trackies, but you can't see under the table here. And Ish's legs, not allowed to touch. And she put shoes on because she's like, I think Tash has toe issues. Like, that's because of the cats. Because in our house, the cat likes toes, and if the toes wiggle, then the toes.
So no sandals today.
Yeah. Yeah.
Anything else about sensory? And sensory also goes with emotional regulation as well.
Yes.
So it's very hard to regulate your emotions and not to lash out, and to be able to be kind of even Stevens when you are really dysregulated. So what you're going to find is you are going to have more meltdowns when your children are dysregulated. And so the first thing I would say to parents is, if your child is having meltdowns, and they're having meltdowns throughout the day, the place to start in therapy is around regulation.
Yep.
Right? There is no point in working on language or any other goals if your child is dysregulated and having constant meltdowns.
Yep. And when you're in that meltdown state, you're not in a place where you can rationalize anything. You can't be taught. You lose your communication skills. There's just no point dealing with, well, you just can't. You're not in the right frame of mind. And it's, I guess, essential to see, well, first you have to see the sensory stuff around you when you've got no experience with it at all, and begin to, look at your environment differently. So our house now, probably, was it when we started with you? I think we first got the swing set inside. So I took off all the proper swings and got the big lycra. It was just a bit of fabric. So
body swing, right?
Yeah, a body swing. So, and that gives them the proprioception. So sort of like a hug, the fabric wrapped around it. So Missy every morning would be in the swing, and it was in this tiny space. I mean, I know you can't see it, but it was probably 1.5 meters wide, where the swing set just fit in there, and she could bounce her feet and, I don't know, body off either side of the wall. And even now, so my kids are teenagers, but we've got the what do you call it? The obstacle course buckets and the little, what are those bumpy rock things that you balance on? we've got the moon chairs, we've got the fluffy blankets, we've got the weighted blankets, we've got the weighted toys. There's enough fidget spinners and whatnot to sink a ship in this house. But we had none of that before because I just didn't. And there's still loads of parents that if the mum doesn't understand the value of the sensory stuff, then, you know, the kids go without as well.
Or if you get dysregulated by watching your child move, because that can be a real issue as well. So what I've just noticed in therapy, and what, you know, I'll talk to all the mums, because again, I say mums because they're the parent that I see the most often, is that sometimes when their child is like wriggling and jiggling on the chair and bouncing,
does your head in.
My focus is mum, and I want to make sure that mum can stay regulated enough through the session to get all the information that she needs out of the therapy session as well. So it can be really hard. So, and that goes back to co-regulation. So as your child is getting their sensory needs met, are you able to manage your sensory needs as well? Because sometimes the two do not go together. What your child needs and what you need can be completely opposite, and it will do your head in.
Yeah.
Literally.
Yeah. So as far as mums, because I don't know, I suppose you've done it with me as well, and I'm very aware. And as I'm talking, I'm sitting here spinning my ring. I've got bits that move on my watch and whatever else I'm picking at. For another mum, how do you actually have that conversation if it wasn't me? I mean, I don't even remember if we've had this conversation.
In terms of sensory?
Yeah. So what would you put in place or recommend for a mum to stay regulated?
So the first thing that I talk about is sensory in terms of what are the senses. And then I talk about my sensory needs and give them lots of examples of the things that dysregulate me, and particularly in the room. So right now I'm talking and we're doing this podcast, but I can hear the whirring fan.
You know, my laptop is revving its guts out there.
It really is.
I'm used to that noise.
And Tash is used to it and I am not, and I'm having to really filter it out. So I talk about my sensory needs and examples of it both during work and also at home, just to start bridging that knowledge gap, so that the mum that's in the room with me can start going, oh yeah, actually, yeah, that does happen to me in the day, or that doesn't happen, but this happens, and we start filling in those gaps. So what I want the mum to be able to do is to go, okay, I get an idea about what she's talking about. I'm going to start becoming more aware of it, and then I'm going to start filling my capacity cup. I'm going to put things in place in order to keep me regulated. So if we've got time, I've got an example of this. So one of my clients that came in 2 weeks ago, and it was really interesting. So it was mum, and we had two older kiddos, kind of like late primary age, and the little one that I'm going to be working with. And what I could see is that not just mum, but the two older kiddos was trying to parent the little one who's not talking at all, and mum is just constantly on. And so through just the discussion, through observing everything, I mentioned this to mum and said to her, do you have any time that's just you on your own? And she said to me, Ish, you know, the thing is, I get to like 6:30 and I just need 5 minutes. I just need 5 minutes. I don't need like an hour. I don't need 30 minutes. I just need 5 minutes to myself. And every time I say to the kids, I just need 5 minutes, they're at me and they want stuff.
Yeah.
And so we talked about having mummy time, and we talked about using a timer, and then I talked to the older kids about that, and we put this strategy into place, and now all four of them now have their own time, all at the same time, and mum gets her 5 minutes, and she's just like, this is amazing. So it doesn't take much.
No, I've actually, like, to get my 5 minutes, I have eaten in the shower. I've sat at the bottom of the shower and eaten my food.
Water. I'm so
Strategically
dysregulated at just listening to that.
No, I can't do soggy food, so I've somehow managed it. But
That's
being
so
that
skilled.
desperate,
that
I've sat and had coffee and eaten in the shower.
Yeah.
Because I guess I'm thinking back a different house, so they were younger, but that would have been the only lock.
Yeah.
Would have been the bathroom lock.
Yeah. So this is what I do. I sit with mums and we work out what's possible and what's not. So it's not like that strategy is going to work for every parent, because it depends on your child and depends on your situation. But it's about really becoming, I think for us therapists, becoming detectives and really looking and piecing together the clues and going, hey, I think in your circumstance, this is what might work.
Yep.
Are you happy to trial it? And if you trust your therapist, you're going to trial it.
Yeah.
And then, like you can tweak it. And it may not, work for forever. It might only work for a couple of weeks before the kids get tired of it, and then you've got to try something else.
Yep.
But it's getting it started. And it's the one change that's going to make the biggest change.
Yeah, yep.
And that's what I'm always going for.
Yep. And I think, the value of having a good speechy or OT is having someone outside of the picture from all that crazy that can see, what might work and give you ideas for what's going to work for you and your family.
Absolutely, because I think when you're in the thick of it, you can't see it. You can't see it. And we know ourselves, just take it out of that parent-child situation and just think about it as a human adult. You know yourself, you can be in situations where you can't see the forest from the trees, but you're talking to your friend and your friend can see it as clear as day. Yeah? So it's the same.
I have one more question.
Go for it.
What are your weirdest sensory issues?
My weirdest sensory issues. So many. Should ask my husband.
Yeah, I'm going to pause. It helps if one turns the microphone on. Let's go again.
So weirdest, you were asking me
your weirdest sensory issues.
So I don't know if it's a weirdest, but in terms of sensory for me, it's noise. So we live in an apartment and with the doors closed on a fairly busy road. So when the doors are closed, it's not very noisy at all. So then I'll go, oh, it's really quiet outside. So I'm going to open the door, and that's when the motorcycle that's revving its engine is going to go past, and it's like nails on the blackboard for me.
Yep.
The other day I was working in my study and it was a really windy day, and I just wanted to tell the wind to be quiet. I thought you'd appreciate that. And I was like shouting in my head, be quiet.
Oh no.
And that was with all the windows closed. It was so
There's not
noisy.
really anywhere else to go. Noise cancelling headphones.
Yeah, this is exactly it. That's what I almost took my noise cancelling headphones, and I was like, no, I can deal with this. No, I should have done that.
I had a fly in the room while I was trying to work. And I just couldn't get rid of it. And noise cancelling headphones. Although with the noise cancelling headphones, I remember that conversation with you as well. I felt so weird because it does something weird to your ears. And I didn't feel like throwing up, but it was another I don't fit in my skin. I've got lots of issues. Anyway.
Another one is insects. I don't like insects on me. So I have a huge issue with insects, and I will burn the house down if there is like a cockroach or a grasshopper or something in the house. So
you would love my child, Lockie, when he was little, my boy when he was little, would bring in millipedes. So he was always holding millipedes. But then it wasn't that on your pillow. It was half bugs that you would wake up, and it's just on your pillow next to your head. And I love my children.
No thanks. Even the parents know. So I've had one of my kids who was really into like what is it they call it? The insects, the mini bees, and he was really into collecting grasshoppers and things from the garden. And so Mum was like, "It's just a bit weird about bugs. So we've just got to be really careful, and we've got to get her consent and permission before we can bring it into the clinic." And I was utterly grateful that Mum A did that, and B that insect was fully contained in a container, because otherwise I would have been in my car driving home.
You're probably glad to not know us when we're in that early stage, because bugs seem to be a very ASD kind of fixation thing. My boy used to have little slaters, and because his fine motor skills weren't brilliant, so he'd pick them up and he'd smash them before he could actually show you. So you had to pretend it, because he was showing you a bug and it was all smashed up in his fingers. And he used to love grasshoppers.
What's
grasshopper? He couldn't say it. They were grasshoppers. But anyway,
that sounds horrific.
Bugs everywhere. Bugs everywhere in our house. But yes, I'm done with the squeaking chair. So I'm gonna say goodbye there. Yeah. We need a sensory break. Okay, I will see you guys next week.
See you later.